Hey, welcome back to This Old Baker. I'm Kim, and today I want to talk about something I get asked constantly in the comments, in my DMs, at the grocery store when someone recognizes me from the social media reels, which still feels weird to say out loud. The question is some version of, does homemade actually taste better? Or is that just something food bloggers say to make you feel bad about buying the jar? Fair question. And I want to give you a real answer, not just a trust me, it's better answer. Because there's an actual reason homemade wins. And it's not about love or effort or any of that soft stuff we tend to lean on. It's about what the two things are actually optimized for. Here's the thing. When a company makes a seasoning blend, a sauce, a mix, whatever it is, they are not optimizing for how it tastes in your kitchen tonight. They're optimizing for how it tastes after it sits on a truck for 3 weeks, then a warehouse for 2 months, then a grocery store shelf under fluorescent lights for who knows how long, and then your pantry for another 6 months after that. That product has to survive all of that and still taste like something. That's the job. Flavor is important, but shelf life is the actual constraint they're designing around. And when shelf life is the constraint, you make different choices. You use more salt because salt is a preservative and a flavor enhancer at the same time. So it's doing double duty. You use stabilizers and anti-caking agents so the mix doesn't clump in humidity. You often use dried garlic and onion instead of fresh because fresh doesn't survive that supply chain. You flatten out some of the more delicate, more perishable flavor compounds because they degrade, and you compensate with things that don't degrade like salt, sugar, and a handful of ingredients you can't pronounce. None of that makes the company evil or lazy. It makes sense. It's math, but it means the product you're eating was built to survive a journey, not to taste incredible on a Tuesday. When you make it yourself, you don't have that constraint. Your seasoning blend isn't going into a truck. It's going into a jar in your pantry, and you're going to use it this week or next week, not 8 months from now. So you get to make completely different choices. You can use less salt because you're not relying on it to preserve anything. You can use real dried herbs at the ratio that actually tastes good instead of the ratio that's cheapest to source in bulk. You can taste it as you go and adjust, which no factory line is doing for your specific batch. That's the actual answer to, does homemade taste better? It's not magic, and it's not really even about love, honestly, even though that's the nice story we tell. It's that you and the manufacturer are solving two different problems. They're solving, how do we make this survive? And you're solving, how do we make this taste right? Those are just not the same recipe. I think about this a lot with my copycat seasoning blends, the ones I've built to match popular store brands. When I break down what's actually in the original, so much of it is filler. Not because the company is trying to trick you, but because that filler is what makes the product shelf stable and cheap to produce at scale. When I rebuild it at home, I can cut a lot of that out and still land on the same flavor, sometimes a better one, because I'm not fighting the same constraints they are. Now, I want to be fair here because I don't think this is a story where store-bought is the villain. Store-bought exists because most people don't have time to make everything from scratch every single day, and that's real. Nobody's out here judging you for keeping a jar of taco seasoning in the pantry for a Tuesday night when you're exhausted. That's not a moral failing. That's just being a person with a life. But here's what I'd push back on, gently. A lot of people think the choice is all or nothing. Either you're a from-scratch purist who makes everything by hand, or you're buying every mix off the shelf. And that's just not true. And honestly, it's the thing that keeps people from ever trying homemade at all, because it feels like too big a commitment. The move that's actually worked for me, and for a lot of you who've told me this in the comments, is picking the handful of things you make constantly and just replacing those. You don't need to rebuild your whole pantry. You need to look at what you reach for every week, your go-to seasoning blend, your gravy packet, your hot cocoa mix, whatever it is, and make a batch of that once. Store it in a jar. Use it exactly the way you'd use the store version, scoop for scoop, except now it's better and it's yours. That's the whole philosophy behind what I build here. Homemade without starting from zero. You're not becoming a different kind of cook. You're not adding hours to your week. You're just swapping one jar for a better jar, and you get to keep every bit of the convenience while ditching the compromise that made the original taste flat in the first place. And then there's also something I don't talk about enough, which is control. When you make it yourself, you decide what's in it. If you need less sodium, you make it with less sodium. If someone in your house has a sensitivity to a particular filler or additive, you just leave it out. You're not reading an ingredient label trying to decode what natural flavors means. Because you put it there. And look, there's a taste difference you can actually notice, not just a philosophical one. Dried herbs and spices lose potency over time, and a jar that's been sitting on a store shelf for months has already lost some of what made it good. When you make a batch at home, you're using ingredients at closer to peak potency, and you can genuinely taste that. It's brighter, it's more specific. A homemade taco seasoning doesn't taste like taco flavor in the generic sense. It tastes like cumin and chili and garlic distinctly, because those flavors haven't been sitting around fading for half a year. So if you take one thing from this episode, let it be this. Store-bought isn't worse because someone didn't care. It's worse because it was built to solve a different problem than the one you actually have in your kitchen. Once you see it that way, it stops being about guilt or effort, and it just becomes a practical decision. Which problem are you solving for tonight, convenience or flavor? And can you get both? By keeping a few homemade jars stocked, so convenience and flavor stop being opposites. That's what I'm building over at this old baker, one jar at a time, and I'd love for you to come build your pantry alongside me. You can find all the recipes I mentioned, the copycat blends, the pantry mixes, all of it, over at thisoldbaker.com. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you in the next episode.